and welcome back to this MBA in Marketing Management. In this session, we're going to be looking a little bit more in detail at strategy, specifically the area of making strategic choices. So before we continue, have a think about the types of choices that organisations can make strategically. So at this point, I would just stop the video and just take a pen and paper and just think about that. Okay, so in terms of strategic choices, so there are various options available to organisations in terms of strategy. So the kind of strategy choices relate to things such as how organisations relate to competitors in terms of their competitive business strategies, how broad and diverse organisations should be in terms of their corporate portfolios. Another choice that's available to organisations is looking at how far they should extend themselves internationally, how much they are or how far they are creative and innovative, and how they should pursue strategies through organic development, acquisitions, or strategic alliances. So here we can see in this diagram that we have the strategic choices, which are basically split up into three areas. So strategic choices then help to determine the business strategy. So choices related to business positioning relative to their competitors, the directions that the organisation wants to go towards in terms of choices of products, industries and markets to pursue, and then the methods in which to do that. So how to pursue these strategies, whether it's organic, acquisition or alliance. So you may have come across the term SBUs. SBUs are strategic business units. So a strategic business unit supplies goods or services for a distinct domain of activity. A small business will just have one SBU, whereas a large diversified corporation will be made up of multiple SBUs. So a strategic business unit supplies goods or services for a distinct domain of activity. SBUs can be called divisions or also profit centres, and they can be identified by market-based criteria such as similar customers, channels and competitors, or potentially capability-based criteria where they have similar strategic capabilities. So before we continue, what do you think is the purpose of SBUs? So we've discussed what they are. What do you think their purpose is? So pause the video for a second and give some thought to that. So the purpose of SBUs is to decentralise the initiative to smaller units within the corporation, so strategic business units can pursue their own distinct strategy. The purpose of SBUs is also to allow large corporations to vary their business strategies according to the different needs of external markets, and to encourage accountability. So each strategic business unit can be held responsible for its own costs, revenues and profits. We've come across Porter in various other modules on strategy. So Porter introduced the term generic strategy to mean basic types of competitive strategy that hold across many kinds of business situations. So competitive strategy is all about how a strategic business unit or an SBU achieves competitive advantage in its domain of activity. So competitive advantage is about how a strategic business unit creates value for its users, both greater than the costs of supplying them and superior to that of rival SBUs. So we can see how this works here. So this is one of the models from Porter, which basically looks at organisations operating in two spheres. So it talks about organisations that operate in a narrow target market, so that's their competitive scope. Are they operating in a narrow field or are they operating in a broad field? And then it looks at whether they focus on differentiating themselves or whether they focus on their competitive advantage in terms of keeping costs low. And then this is broken down into four distinct segments, as we see in these quadrants. So if we look at the cost leadership strategy, this involves becoming the lowest cost organisation in a domain of activity. So four key cost drivers that can help deliver cost leadership are things such as lowering the input costs, economies of scale, experience, and product process and design. So here we can see a comparison between an average competitor with its rate of costs and profit margins, with a cost leader with parity, a cost leader with proximity, and then here we can see one with a much higher profit margins, and that's a differentiator. So then if we move into from cost leadership and go and talk about differentiation, what do we mean by that? So when we're talking about differentiation, this involves uniqueness along some dimension that is sufficiently valued by customers to allow a price premium. So there's two key issues we need to take into account here. So the strategic customer on whose needs the differentiation is based is one issue. And the other issue are such as things as key competitors. So who are the rivals and who may become a rival? So let's take the US airline industry as an example. So we can see that it's going to be quite different depending on what area of the market they're operating in and what their differentiator is. So if we take an airline such as Southwest Airlines, which is quite widely reported on in terms of excellent customer service, we see that actually their service attributes are very strong and also their flight performance attributes are strong. If we compare that to an organisation such as US Air or Delta, we can see that they may be quite strong in the area of service attributes, but are not so strong in the area of flight performance attributes. And then compare that to an airline such as United, which I think was in the press just a couple of years ago for very poor customer service. We can see here that actually its service attributes are poor, and also its flight performance attributes are also poor. So basically we can plot, in this case, different airlines along the two axes of either service attributes or flight performance attributes. So another area that we can focus on is looking at actually what a focus strategy is. So a focus strategy targets a narrow segment of domain of an activity and tailors its products or services to the needs of that specific segment to the exclusion of all others. So two types of focus strategy are cost focus. So we were just talking about airlines. So an example of that would be an airline such as Ryanair, which is absolutely focused on keeping costs low. Or a differentiation focus strategy. So an organisation that's operating in quite a narrow field, such as eCover. So eCover provides offers products in the area of detergents and washing liquids and powders, etc., and all with this idea of being ecological. So those are two types of focus strategy. And then successful focus strategies depend on at least one of these three key factors. So they're either operating in a distinct segment, so they're aware of these needs of the distinct segment that they're operating in. They have distinct segment value chains or viable segment economics. And Porter argues that actually it's better to choose which generic strategy to adopt and then stick rigorously to it. Because if you don't do that, there is the danger of being kind of stuck in the middle, i.e. doing no particular strategy very well. So the argument for pure generic strategies is a little bit controversial. Even Porter acknowledges that the strategies can be combined. For example, if being unique costs nothing. And here we have something called the strategy clock. So a strategy clock is based on two variables. So it looks at price from low to high, and then it also looks at the perceived product or service benefits, which also goes from low to high. And then we can see within that there are four key strategy areas. So there's what we call differentiation strategies, hybrid strategies, low price strategies, and the bulk of the clock there is taken up with non-competitive strategies. So we'll go through what these mean in more detail now. So when we talk about differentiation strategies, strategies in this zone seek to provide products that offer benefits that differ from those offered by competitors. So a range of alternative strategies from differentiation without price premium, which is used to increase market share. So in that strategy clock, that was at 12 o'clock. Another alternative strategy is differentiating with price premium, which is used to increase profit margins. So that was at 1 o'clock. And then there's also focus differentiation, which is used for customers that demand top quality and will pay a big premium. and that was at 2 o'clock on the strategy clock. The strategy clock looks at low price and low price combined with low perceived product benefits, focusing on price sensitive market segments. So what we also know as no frills, so a no frills strategy, which is typified by low cost airlines such as Ryanair. And then low price than competitors while offering similar product benefits. So this is aimed at increasing market share, which would be typified by retailers or grocery retailers such as Asda and Walmart. Then with the strategy clock, we have the hybrid strategies. So the hybrid strategies seek to simultaneously achieve differentiation and low price relative to competitors. So hybrid strategies can be used to enter markets and build position quickly. They can be used as an aggressive attempt to win market share and also to build sales volume and gain from mass production. And then in the strategy clock, what we also saw was that section of non-competitive strategies. So this involves increasing prices without increasing service product benefits. Non-competitive would be in competitive markets with such strategies will be doomed to failure. So these kind of strategies are only feasible where there is strategy lock-in or a near monopoly position. Strategic lock-in is where users become dependent on a supplier and are not able to use another supplier without substantial switching costs. So lock-in can be achieved in two ways. So that can be achieved either by controlling complementary products or services. This may have happened to you when you've perhaps bought something like a cheap product, maybe a razor, and then you've realised that it will actually only work with one type of blade. So this kind of happens when you think you've got a good deal on something and you realise that actually you're locked in because it's impossible to replace a part or a part of the product without using the same supplier. So that's a way of locking us in. We're dependent on that supplier from then onwards. Another way of achieving lock-in is creating a proprietary industry standard. For example, Microsoft. So we know when we buy Microsoft products, we are tied into using their Windows operating system. And of course, then you may want to switch to Apple, but there's that kind of hesitation that you're very familiar with the software. So you've got that sort of slight resistance to want to change. So that's what we mean by strategic lock-in. And then hyper-competition is a term that's used. So hyper-competition describes markets with continuous disequilibrium and change. For example, as we've seen in the popular music or consumer electronics markets, with things changing constantly all the time and very quickly. So successful hyper-competition demands speed and initiative rather than defensiveness. So organisations operating in this kind of hyper-competitive place or sphere have to have interactive strategies. And these four key principles are things such as cannibalising basis of success, a series of small moves rather than big dramatic ones, being a little bit unpredictable, and misleading the competition. And then when we talk about competition, we can talk about collaboration with competition. We can see ways of improving competitiveness by actually collaborating. So competitiveness may be improved by collaboration to achieve, for example, either increased selling or increased buying power, increasing the barriers to entry into a market, decreasing the risk of substitution. Actually, by collaborating, we might get more competitiveness in order to actually achieve entry into new markets, shared work with customers, and actually improving shareholder expectations. So those are some of the ways that actually by collaborating, we can actually potentially achieve improved competitiveness. You may have come across the term game theory. So this has been especially used in economics, and maybe if you've done any kind of negotiations skills classes, you often talk about game theory as a model to use. Game theory is the study of mathematical models of conflict and cooperation between intelligent, rational decision makers. As I mentioned, it's a term that's used in economics, also political science, as well as psychology, in addition to logic, computer science, biology, and poker. And originally, it addressed this idea of a zero-sum game in which one person's gain results in losses for the other participants. So if you have come across game theory, maybe just reflect for a few minutes, what lessons can be learned from game theory and how could we apply this into the area of strategy? So game theory, the lessons that can be learned are very much around this idea of encouraging managers to consider how a game can be transformed from lose-lose competition to win-win cooperation. And you may have come across the dilemma which is known as the prisoner's dilemma. And if you're interested in finding out more about that, which is absolutely related to this area of game theory, then have a look at the YouTube video there, which explains it in more detail. So as it said, what we're trying to get people to do is to come away from this idea that if one person is going to lose, the other person is going to win, and vice versa, and trying to come at it from a viewpoint of that we can both win. Rather than compete, we can both cooperate. So in terms of kinds of corporate strategy, there are 4 grand strategic alternatives. So I'm going to discuss those here in more detail. So we've got, first of all, what we call stability strategy. And the main aim here for organisations is to stabilise and improve functional performance. And the ways of doing that are through profit, through pause or proceed with caution strategy, or through a no change strategy. Another kind of strategic alternative is expansion strategy. So the main aim here being high growth. And that can be done through concentrating, integrating, diversifying, cooperating, or internationalization. Through, for example, ways of doing that could be takeovers, joint ventures, mergers, strategic alliances, different types of strategy, either kind of cross-national, international, or multi-domestic. Another type of corporate strategy is known as retrenchment strategy. So the main aim here is contracting its activities, and that's done through things such as turnaround, divestment, and liquidation in modes such as winding up, so either compulsory winding up the organisation or voluntarily winding up, or winding it up through supervision of court. And then another type of corporate strategy is combination strategies. So it probably wouldn't come as a surprise to you to realise that that's basically a combination of all of the above policies simultaneously in different businesses or at different times. So some examples here are, for example, a merger of TTK Chemicals with TTK Pharma, or TT Industries and Textiles Limited expanding through a joint venture, or TTK Limited diversifying into different areas such as cooking utensils, or TTK Maps and Publications then broadening into the general publishing business after a turnaround. So combination is really very much about different ways of doing things in different businesses or at different times. So what we can see here is, of course, we've got to talk about competition. And there is always a threat, isn't there, when you've got your strategy and you need to be aware of what your competition is doing. There's always going to be forces that are going to determine what's going to happen and how attractive the particular segment that you're working in. So we've got industry competitors, so that's what we call segment rivalry. We've got buyers and buying power, suppliers and supplier power. We've got the threat of substitutes, the threat of mobility from potential new entrants. So we've got this idea of substitute products coming in, so buyers growing bargaining power or suppliers growing bargaining power, intense entrants, or intense segment rivalry, or potentially new entrants. So this model here is known as the 5 forces which determine the segment structural attractiveness. And then, of course, in terms of barriers and profitability, what do we need to be aware of? Well, we need to be aware that there's always going to be barriers in terms of entry into the market and exit from the market. So we can see here in this quadrant, we've got 4 different quadrants in this matrix, that we can measure this from low to high for both of those 2 variables, so in terms of entry and exit. So if it's a low exit and a low entry, then that's going to equal low and stable, low barriers and stable returns. If we have entry barriers which are high, but exit barriers which are low, that signifies high barriers but stable returns. Then we also have the area of high exit barriers and low entry barriers. So that will actually signify a little bit more risk in terms of returns. It's low but risky returns. And then we have the area of where you've got high exit barriers and high entry barriers, which in turn signifies high and risky returns. So we can see that we can actually kind of break it up into those 2 variables in terms of the exit barriers, low to high, and the entry, low to high. So before continuing with the video, just pause to reflect for a minute and think about what do you need to be aware of in terms of identifying competitors. So we're talking now a little bit more about that. What do we need to be a little bit more conscious of? So in terms of identifying competitors, we need to be aware of various factors involved. So we should really kind of be a little bit aware of what we mean in terms of the industry concept of competition. So what industry are we operating in, and what are the number of sellers and the degree of differentiation of those sellers in terms of the marketplace. So we've come across the term monopoly. You may not be so familiar with the term oligopoly. So an oligopoly is a state of limited competition in which a market is shared by a small number of producers or sellers. So for example, in the UK, that would be kind of the big car manufacturing firms, which would perhaps be Toyota, Ford, General Motors, Volkswagen. The equivalent in the States would be more along the lines of Ford or GMC and Chrysler. So we need to understand, is it a pure oligopoly or is it a differentiated oligopoly? Is it monopolistic competition or is it pure competition? Further things we need to be a little bit aware of are, as we just discussed, these exit barriers and entry barriers and mobility barriers. We need to be aware of the cost structure. We need to be aware of how they are integrated vertically and what their degree of globalization is. And then we can talk a little bit more about the market concept of competition. So when we're analysing competitors, we need to perhaps look at it across different objectives, in the sense that individual users, commercial and industrial users, are all going to have different needs. So if we look, for example, at a company like Dell, we can see that the individual users are going to be focused on things such as personal computers, hardware, accessories, etc. And that will also go across into the commercial and industrial sphere. So it's really understanding to what degree does the organisation, or is the organisation able to expand outwards? So what is the objectives of the organisation in terms of its expansion strategy? What do you think are the variables we need to consider when analysing competitors? What other variables do we need to take into account? So there are basically 3 variables to monitor when we're analysing our competition. So we need to take into account the share of the market, the share of mind, and the share of heart that they have. And when we design our competitive strategies, we could, for example, have a bit of a, as we see here, a kind of a hypothetical market structure in which the market is taken up by perhaps 40% market leaders, 30% are what we would call perhaps market challengers. Market followers perhaps could then comprise 20%, and then the people that form the niche part of the market would maybe be a much smaller percentage of that at 10%. So market leader strategies really involve expanding the total market. So that's looking at either new users, so how we're going to penetrate the market differently, so having some kind of market penetration strategy, or a new market segment strategy, or a geographical expansion strategy. Other ways to expand the total market are things such as looking at new uses or more usage. Or another way of doing it is, rather than expansion, is actually defending the market share. And there's different types and ways of defending. So as we can see here, as the position as the defender, if we're going to have an attacker coming in, well, we can look at that and defend it in various ways, which I'll describe here. So we have what we call position defense, flank defense, preemptive defense, so being on the front foot rather than the back foot, or counter-offensive defense when they've already attacked and then we defend in return. Or there's mobile defense. When we talk about mobile defense strategy, that includes things such as broadening the market, what's the principle of the objective, what's the principle of mass, and how do we diversify the market. And you also have something called contraction defense. So that's when you plan to kind of contract or strategically withdraw from the market. When designing competitive strategies, there's various ways about going about it. For example, you may want to do that in terms of having a brand extension strategy or a multi-brand strategy. You may want to ramp up your advertising, so heavy advertising and doing more pioneering media. You may want to ramp up the sales, so increase sales numbers and have more of an aggressive sales force. May want to make sales promotion a bit more effective, or be a bit more competitive, so have competitive toughness, or manufacturing efficiency and cost cutting, so look at ways of actually keeping the cost low, or some sort of brand management system. So these are all potential ways in which we can design a competitive strategy. In terms of market challenger strategies, it's really important to define the strategic objective and the opponents, because this can then attack the market leader. It can attack firms of its own size that are not doing the job and are underfinanced, and it can attack small local and regional firms. Or another way of designing a competitive strategy is to choose a general attack strategy. And as we see here, this may come from different directions. So being the person who's the defender, it may come from the front, or it may be an encirclement attack, a guerrilla attack, a bypass attack, or a flank attack. And when we're choosing a specific attack strategy, we need to take into account things such as price discount. Is that going to be an option? Lowering the price of the goods, or maybe making goods more prestige, maybe actually having more product innovation or product proliferation, improving the services, some sort of innovation in the way that we distribute, keeping, as we mentioned in the previous slides, keeping the manufacturing costs low, or maybe actually going all out on some kind of intensive advertising promotion. In terms of a market follower strategy, this could be literally innovative imitation or product imitation, or product innovation, or for more broad strategies such as being a counterfeiter, a cloner, an imitator, or an adapter. And when we talk about being in the market niche, well, the market niche strategy is very much about high margin versus high volume. And this is where we can start to kind of create some roles around this in terms of being a niche or niche specialist roles. So is this about working or creating an organization around end user specialism, value added reseller, for example, vertical level specialism, customer size specialist, or being a specific customer specialist, geographical specialist? Could it be about being a particular product or product line specialist, and product feature specialist, or job, shop, quality, price, service, or channels? So those are all ways in which we can kind of create a market niche strategy in actually being more specific on the kind of market and the areas that we are specializing in. Okay, so that has concluded this session on strategic choices and analysing competitors and ways to design competitive strategies. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session.